Hello, welcome back here in CAYDEN'S Weather Center right now. Today is October 24th, 2024. Right now, we're paying attention here into the tropics. You know, obviously, you're probably looking at the National Hurricane Center and be like, what? What are we paying attention to? Well, as of right now, the National Hurricane Center has nothing marked. We are paying attention here to the GFS and the European model. As of right now, the European model does not have barely anything forming over here in the Western Caribbean. The GFS, though, has really been consistent here on a storm forming in the Western Caribbean. The big question is obviously where does it go, and that's everyone's big concern here. The latest GFS model runs, we'll go over that here in a little bit, have brought it into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, possibly bringing it into Florida, and that could be obviously a big issue for us because we know Florida does not need anything else after 3 landfalls this season so far. But as of right now, the National Hurricane Center is still saying tropical cyclone activity is not expected in the next 7 days, but maybe in a couple of days, we could be seeing a possible area of interest in this circle right here. If we take a look here at the IR satellite here on Tropical Tidbits, not very much going on, obviously, in the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean. We can clearly see maybe a little bit of thunderstorm activity going over here over the eastern part of the Dominican Republic, and a little thunderstorm activity kind of going on over here in the Western Caribbean, but not much is going on right now, and the reason because of that is kind of more of the dry air that we're kind of seeing. So we have a little bit of dry air that's going over here in the Western Caribbean, going over the Yucatan, and then also going into parts of Mexico, and that will eventually make its way into the Gulf of Mexico here. Then we see a very large amount of dry air kind of going over the southeast United States, going over Florida, and then maybe even parts of the northern Bahamas here that are dealing with a lot of dry air. But the eastern Caribbean right here that we can clearly see has a lot of moist air, and this will eventually make its way over here into the Western Caribbean, and that's why we're going to have that more favorable environment here once this moist air kind of gets in this region. Obviously, the big question is where does this storm could possibly go here? It could head out into the Atlantic. We still have some models bringing that, and majority of the ensembles are still bringing it out into the Atlantic, but still it's something to pay attention to. But, after all this moist air gets over here, that's something we're going to pay attention to, and that will give the tropical cyclone, if there is one or anything for tropical development, a little bit more of a room for some pretty big organization there. Taking a look here at the Euro probabilities here, this is 72 to 120 hours out right now because we are still not anticipating anything. The GFS isn't even anticipating any storm to form until at least November 3rd, and we're going to pay attention to this area right here. This storm, this is kind of something we're going to pay attention here. This is the probabilities of a tropical depression. This will eventually turn its way up to the north here, and that could cause a little bit more of that favorable environment to kind of get into it. You kind of can see that, and then, the chances obviously for the European model do kind of stay the same as it heads up to the north. You can clearly see that it does dip down and then possibly goes off to the northeast here, and that obviously would impact a lot more different people here. That would obviously impact maybe possibly Jamaica, eastern part of Cuba, and then parts of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and that could be obviously something that is a whole different scenario than what the GFS is anticipating, as the GFS is anticipating it to go into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So there's a lot of potentials that could be still going on right here with this storm, especially since it's so far out. We don't have anything to really focus on as of right now. This isn't a massive thing that has formed and that is heading anywhere. We don't know, but as of right now, it's something to keep our eye out on. Here's the Euro ensembles. Here we can clearly see over here November 1st on a Friday, we could clearly see there's some low pressure starting to form. Majority of them will go off kind of off to the northeast here, and you'll see that here with the European model, and you'll definitely see with the European compared to the GFS, a lot more of the models with GFS are bringing it a lot more stronger. You kind of can see a little bit more of that turn over here. The Euro has been really consistent on kind of bringing it like this, and then kind of brings it out into the Atlantic, but obviously stuff can change here. We're going to pay attention to that as some of these models do change. That's why it's so far out, so that's why you shouldn't be paying attention to it as much right now. But obviously it's something to keep an eye out on if you live in Jamaica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, and maybe even southern central Florida here, as we could be seeing that very closely here. Heading to the GFS ensembles, completely different than the European ensembles. You can see maybe here, October 30th, the day before Halloween, a little bit more of, favorable, for tropical development before November, and then obviously we could see majority of those models start to bring it up possibly as a high-end tropical storm, maybe a low-end category 1 hurricane starts to eventually make its way over here, and we can see that here could possibly bringing itself into the Bahamas and the eastern parts of Cuba. That could bring heavy amounts of rainfall and possible tropical system, tropical storm, hurricane conditions over here to Cuba. That obviously we still don't know the intensity so far. Then you head out over here with the Euro ensembles. You do see some go over here into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and that's what we've seen the main model run at least go through. But majority of those ensembles do just take it back out here into the Atlantic, which would obviously be one of the best news here for, if you live in the state of Florida in the United States, but obviously it would be worse for Cuba and parts of Haiti. So that's something that, we have to pay attention to, especially because even though the hurricane season is getting closer of ending here. We're just a little bit above a month here left. The Caribbean is still into possibly the 30 degrees Celsius here, and that is still also a lot of fuel for these tropical systems here. It is starting to cool down here in the Western Caribbean, 29 degrees Celsius here, and the Gulf of Mexico has really started to cool down, especially as we're starting to get these cold fronts that are starting to eventually come down. That'll cool down the waters a little bit more here, but we can clearly see 27 degrees Celsius in some of these areas, 28 degrees, but right off the coast here of Florida, 23 degrees Celsius off the west coast, 24, 26 here. So obviously the closer to the coast, the more cooler the waters are as we're starting to get into that winter time and that, late fall here. You can still see though, heading out to the Atlantic, there's still some, temperatures that are still up in the 29 degrees Celsius. So even though, this storm might not go to Florida, might not go to the United States, it could still impact Cuba and then have that possibility for even more formation of a stronger system here by the Bahamas, as there's still 30 to 29 degrees Celsius waters there. Then eventually, let's say it did turn off to the northeast, it possibly would impact Bermuda, but the waters are cooler, so that would give a little bit more of weakening room there for that storm. Let's take a look at this. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly. So from the years of 1981 to 2010, you can see all this orange right here in the main development region in the Caribbean. That is above average for that, for this time of year on what it's supposed to be. That is above average, and we've seen this majority of the whole year. Now we're starting to see a little bit more of that blue kind of on the west coast of Florida, the east coast of Florida, and the Carolinas, and then we see it really off the outer banks here of California, or not California, North Carolina. I don't know where I got California from, but and then a little bit of spots here of kind of the it's average for this time of year, but mostly of the Gulf of Mexico is a little bit cooler than average right now, and that's something that could limit some tropical development as well, because obviously tropical systems need warm waters, deep warm waters, to really get themselves going. Take a look here at the 6Z GFS. We can clearly see there's that possible tropical development, tropical storm, 999 millibars right here, October 3rd. This will eventually push its way off to the west here, according to the GFS, and we'll see that here shortly. Goes through Jamaica here, could possibly rapidly intensify, 958. And this, the GFS has been pretty bold on this storm so far compared to all the other models. Then brings it up 951, then brings it into Venice, Florida here, and that obviously would be a big impact here for the west coast of Florida, especially after Milton. Then you kind of can see that, and that's kind of something to pay attention to, obviously, because if we head to the 00Z models, a little bit more of a stronger storm here in the Western Caribbean, very strong, 939 millibars, brings it off very far off to the west here, and then you can see kind of where that front is, and that will kind of get dragged over here. And you'll see that here in the GFS model run, you can see it kind of get pulled off to the northeast due to that cold front kind of coming down, and that will force it to go to the northeast. But we've seen a very, very far run over here to the Florida Panhandle, and very far, now heading more to the eastern side. So, and this would be November 4th if this did happen. So a lot can change. We've seen a little bit of change there. The European model not really anticipating too much from this storm as of right now. Maybe this right here, November 2nd. Obviously, the GFS does go a lot farther out. There's that cold front right there. There's a high pressure that is right over here. That's kind of, blocking a little bit of that. But, kind of can see this tropical, disturbance right down here in the Western Caribbean. Obviously, the big question is where does it go after that? We've seen a lot of changes here in the models. The Euro AI still, we're paying attention to that very, very closely as well. Once again, there's that front, there's that high pressure building in. That's going to block it. from going off to the north here, and then we see that that low pressure as that front. I would say the Euro AI is completely not really having anything form or possibly formation a little bit more after the storm here in the Western Caribbean. So something to pay attention to very, very closely. You head into the GFS ensembles here. You can clearly see really some explosive development here on Halloween. That's when we could be really anticipating a possible storm. So we're still very far out. And then Jamaica really in, the smackdown center of this, and Cuba as well. You could definitely see. And then after that, November 4th, that's when we see a little bit more of a split here with the model runs here, the ensembles. A majority of those models, we can clearly see this in this circle right here, do eventually get pulled off to the northeast in the Atlantic. Now, of course, there's still some that kind of go into the Gulf of Mexico here, but obviously there's something, to still pay attention to as it's so far out. So, don't pay attention to it at, like a major amount, because we still have a very long time until the storm could possibly form here. We're looking at a week and a half. So now let's say the GFS model, the recent 6Z, was right with this storm. This is, the rainfall that the GFS is anticipating here for Florida. We could clearly see not too much is going on right now with the, let's head maybe into having a little bit of issues here. So Puerto Rico definitely, in the Dominican Republic, reaching very, maybe 2 inches of rain, possibly maybe 8 inches of rain over here. It's kind of a little bit hard to kind of see in this region over here, but you can see for Florida, all that rain would be off down to the south, but eventually, let's say that 6Z was right, majority of that rain will kind of head up into this Florida region, and that would dump heavy amounts of rain, and that's definitely the last thing Florida wants right now. Or, I'm sorry, that is the European model, so that's kind of why. So the European model, the GFS, now this is the GFS right here. Let's say the 6Z was right for the GFS. A lot of rainfall could happen over here in the Western Caribbean. Then eventually, makes its way into west coast of Florida. And you can clearly see, if this model is correct, the Tampa Bay area, the east coast of Florida could be getting almost maybe a foot of rain in some spots. So still something to pay attention to as we go on throughout the next couple of days. What are these models going to be doing? The European, the Canadian, the Icon haven't picked up on this as much, so that's good news for this, but the GFS has been pretty consistent on something forming here in the Western Caribbean. The intensity is still very unknown, and obviously the track is still very unknown, so make sure to kind of take it as a grain of salt right now here until we need to start worrying about this possibly, because we still have so many different scenarios that could be happening here. All depends on a high pressure that's over the east and also a cold front that could be coming down. So make sure, if you do like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe down below for more weather updates here, and make sure to follow my X page down in the description also for more frequent updates here on the tropics, winter weather that is now going to be starting, and the severe weather threats that are going to be continuing as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all stay safe, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.